The Western world is in meltdown because Donald Trump is going to invade and annex Greenland, which is, of course, the sovereign territory of Denmark. Both the United States and Denmark are members of NATO, the Western Military Alliance. And as the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, correctly says, that will be the end of NATO by definition. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which founded NATO, states that an armed attack against one member in Europe or North America is considered an attack against all. So what happens when one NATO member attacks another NATO member? Now, this all comes, of course, after the US illegal act, the illegal attack against Venezuela, bombing Venezuela, kidnapping its leader, with attacks looming against Colombia, against Cuba, against Nicaragua, and against Mexico. No offense to Greenland, because it is important what happens to Greenland, but that is all more important than that they are much bigger nations. Greenland has a population of around 56,000. But the reason I'm starting here today is because of the fact that this attack on Greenland, this annexation of Greenland, which is going to happen, will mean the end of the Western Military Alliance, which will be a big moment in human history. Now, let's just start with this interview with the truly chilling Stephen Miller, who is Donald Trump's deputy chief of staff and a far-right ideologue.
Important topic. The premier of Greenland and the premier of Denmark and other Danish officials are responding to a Twitter post from your wife, Katie Miller, herself a former Trump White House official, showing Greenland covered with an American flag, saying soon. After that was posted, President Trump repeated the claim that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security reasons. The Danish prime minister responded to this in an interview earlier today, as reported by Bloomberg, quote, "I believe one should take the American president seriously when he says it wants Greenland, but I will also make it clear that if the U.S. chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops, including NATO, and thus the security that has been established since the end of the Second World War." Can you rule out that the U.S. is ever going to try to take Greenland by force?
Well, let me go back a step. The president has been clear for months now. So I know you're treating this as breaking news. The president has been clear for months now that the United States should be the nation that has Greenland as part of our overall security apparatus. The United
Right, but
States,
your wife posted that like hours after the Venezuela operation. That's why it's newly relevant.
No, I'll talk with you about it for an hour. I think it's a really important conversation. I just wanted to reset, Jake, by making clear that it has been the formal position of the U.S. government since the beginning of this administration, frankly, going back into the previous Trump administration, that Greenland should be part of the United States. The president has been very clear about that. That is the formal position of the U.S. government.
Right, but can you say that military action against Greenland is off the table?
It wouldn't be military action against Greenland. The Greenland has a population of 30,000 people, Jake. The real question is, by what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? What is the basis of their territorial claim? What is their basis of having Greenland as a colony of Denmark? The United States is the power of NATO. For the United States to secure the Arctic region, to protect and defend NATO and NATO interests, obviously Greenland should be part of the United States. And so that's a conversation that we're going to have as a country. That's a process we're going to have as a community of nations.
So you can't take it off the table that the U.S. would use military force to seize Greenland. You can't take it off the table.
Jake, I understand you're trying very hard to, which again, is your job. I respect it. It's great to get exactly the headline, right? That catchy headline.
I'm just trying to get an answer to the question.
That says Miller refuses to rule out. The United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland. So
One last question, Stephen.
Doesn't make any sense.
One last question.
Well, look at your Greenland. That's all I can say. Wow, the US really knows how to butter up a prospective victim, doesn't it? Really wooing them there. He's not saying Greenland will be a valued part of our great nation, a cherished land we admire so much. He's saying Greenland will become part of our overall security apparatus. Is that what the people of Greenland want? The opportunity to become an appendage of the US military industrial complex. Now, the US is publicly stating that they want Greenland for strategic reasons as part of its great power rivalry with Russia and China. It also clearly wants the rare earth minerals, which are becoming increasingly accessible because of the climate emergency that the US has done more than any other single country to contribute to. Greenland is warming faster than almost anywhere else on the face of the earth. The population figure he gives for Greenland, by the way, is about half the actual level. Just keeps insulting Greenland. But in any case, nobody says here. He scoffs at the idea that the US annexation of Greenland will constitute military action because it has such a small population. So there'll be no resistance, obviously. It's a US military machine. A population of around 56,000 is clearly not going to do very well against that. I mean, in practice, they won't put any resistance, you'd imagine. Now, he clearly believes quite rationally that the Europeans are not going to fight back. When he asks what right Denmark has to Greenland, calling it a colony, to be accurate, it was a colony. It's now part of Denmark and running democratic lines. It is up to the people of Greenland to freely determine their own future without outside coercion. There are many in Greenland who want independence, and we should support unequivocally the right to national self-determination without turning entire peoples, however big, however small, into the footballs of great powers. But let's be clear here. The US is going to annex Greenland. That's absolutely nailed on. What then? Let's just listen to the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen.
Men jeg vil også gøre klart, at hvis USA vælger at angribe et andet NATO-land militært, så hører alting op. Altså inklusiv vores NATO og dermed den sikkerhed, som er blevet tilvejebragt siden afslutningen på 2. verdenskrig.
Men er der en lille del af dig, der tænker, at alting godt kunne høre op med den her præsident?
Jeg gør alt, hvad jeg kan for det modsatte. Jeg tror på demokratiet, og jeg tror på de internationale spilleregler. Jeg tror selvfølgelig også på, at man ikke ændrer grænser med magt, hverken på den ene eller på den anden måde. Det er ikke alene den danske og rigsfællesskabets position, det er heldigvis også Europa.
Dramatic stuff, but she's right. It will be the end of NATO. I want to be clear, I'm not a supporter of NATO. I think it's absurd with the automatic military allies of, say, Turkey, including when it was waging an all-out war against the Kurdish people. We saw what NATO intervention did to Libya, destroyed the country, and we can now see the absurdity of being tied militarily to Donald Trump's United States. They're our automatic military ally because we're all in NATO. Now, when Trump invades Greenland, of course, European leaders are going to respond with pathetic, weak, craven, cowardly nonsense. Let's just listen to this already from a British government minister.
But allies matter. Allies influence, they pressure. I mean, let's look at Greenland, for example, right? We've had the Danish Prime Minister calling on the United States to stop the threats against a historically close ally and against another country and another people who have very clearly said they are not for sale. If Donald Trump's moves against Greenland or against, Denmark, is that a different matter? Will the UK government condemn that?
First, I'll be really clear that allies do matter, which is why these careful diplomatic conversations behind the scenes are ongoing with the United States and with our European allies and Five Eyes partners. And we're not going to give a running commentary.
But what about Greenland?
When it comes to Greenland, Denmark and the United States, these are both NATO members. And I'm really proud that NATO has used discussion over division to ensure that these problems in the past
Can you at least just say Donald Trump should not, do the same in Greenland?
What I can say really clearly is I can't see this being any different to any previous conversations that need to be had between NATO members. And
I find it extraordinary that you can't just say flat out that Donald Trump needs to.
And I think the Venezuelan issue
intervene on Greenland.
The Venezuelan issue
I find that extraordinary.
Is obviously different.
Embarrassing stuff. Now, amusingly, according to the polling, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is less popular amongst British voters than Venezuela's President Maduro. Maduro's on -31. Starmer's a lot less popular. He's on -56, which is the same rating enjoyed by Donald Trump amongst British voters. Hamas is on -58, which is well within the statistical margin of error. I think it'd be interesting to rank Starmer amongst various diseases to see how he compares in popularity to, cholera, the bubonic plague, dengue fever. I think it could be pretty close. But the weak response to the illegal assault on Venezuela has only emboldened Trump and his team. That's why they're after Greenland. I mean, they've got a long list and they think they can get away with anything. But what we have to do as Europeans is to organize to build independence from the United States in the aftermath. Now, what happens to Venezuela next exactly? According to The Telegraph, which is slavishly pro-Trump, Donald Trump has no plan for what comes next in Venezuela, according to sources familiar with his thinking. After capturing Nicolas Maduro on Saturday, the US president is relying on his top aides to develop their Venezuela policy on the hoof. There's no blueprint, no plan for what comes next, said one source. And anybody who tells you that it's anything other than day by day is really not being forthright with you. A declining empire run by far-right fanatics who don't really have a clue what they're doing. What they want is the oil. They made that clear. I mean, look, Trump just keeps saying we want the oil. They also, want to dominate, as we'll talk about, the Western Hemisphere. But, according to the New York Times, the reason Trump sidelined Maria Corina Machado, the right-wing Venezuelan opposition leader, is that installing her would require further US military intervention, as well as destabilizing Venezuela further. Delcy Rodriguez, the acting president, has driven the neoliberal economic policies which the Venezuelan government has already been pursuing for the last few years. So the plan is clearly just use her as a client regime with a massive gun stuck to her head. They're surrounded by the American military. They're under an embargo, their oil, and the US will simply just dictate to the Venezuelan regime to say do exactly what we want in terms of their oil and all the rest. I mean, this is a tragic, I have to say, finale for what was the Bolivarian Revolution. I went to Venezuela myself back in 2012. I covered the elections there. I actually was an election monitor back in 2012. Very different time. That's when the Bolivarian Revolution was in full flourish. The economy had grown massively. Poverty had collapsed. They were investing the revenues from oil in social programs that had a dramatic effect. Now, after Chavez died, and there were structural problems with the Bolivarian Revolution, as it was called, but it went completely off the boil, to put it mildly. And partly US intervention sanctions have played a role, but that's not simply the entire story at all. Partly an over-dependence on oil, in terms of how the so-called Bolivarian Revolution, worked. But to go from Hugo Chavez being the Latin American leader who was most taking the fight to the American empire, who emerged as this great fighter, to his successors being the stooges of the American empire, effectively just proxies for the American empire more than any other, regime in Latin America and more than any other in the history of Venezuela. This is a truly dark, dark chapter in Venezuelan history. I just want to cover something I was leaked from the BBC yesterday. It was a memo sent around journalists which read as follows. As discussed in the 9, to be clear, the 9 is the 9 o'clock editorial meeting. To ensure clarity and consistency in our reporting, please follow these guidelines when describing the recent events in Venezuela. Captured, please attribute this to the US description of the operation. Example, the US says Maduro was captured during the operation. Seized, acceptable for use in our own reporting where appropriate. Avoid using kidnapped. Thanks for keeping this in mind as you work on related stories. Astonishing. Banned from using the term kidnapped. Donald Trump did kidnap the president of Venezuela. I mean, listen to this when a reporter puts to Trump the word used by Venezuela's acting president described the kidnapping of Maduro.
You see that pushback from Rodriguez, and ultimately...
Well, I don't think there was pushback. I think that...
She
frankly,
called it...
Well, you hear a different person than I hear.
Really? So you have spoken with her?
We talked to them.
Oh, you did speak.
They've been very good.
Because she called it kidnapping of Maduro.
It's all right. It's not a bad term.
So even Trump calls it kidnapping, but the BBC bans its journalists from using that word. Now you can see this BBC presenter trip over her words to stick to the orders in the memo.
Well, in the last few hours, opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has spoken to the US broadcaster Fox News in her first televised interview since Nicolas Maduro was seized.
Ludicrous. Yesterday, the US Department of State issued a tweet with a picture of Trump emblazoned with "This is our hemisphere," with talking about the Western Hemisphere, with the additional text, "This is our hemisphere, and President Trump will not allow our security to be threatened." What we're seeing here, which we'll talk much more about, is a declining global superpower trying to retrench by focusing instead on total regional domination. That means many countries are in the firing line. We've got a lot to talk about in the coming weeks and months. 2026 is going to be yet another intense ride, let's put it that way. Please like and subscribe. Help us take on the dire media. Patreon.com/Joe84. You make all of this possible. As I keep saying, I'm writing The Fall of the West at the moment, which will be out later this year, but I'm coming nearly to the end of that. So I can focus more on the video channel. But in the meantime, you've kept the show on the road, so we really appreciate that. So yeah, share the video, like, subscribe, leave your comments, and I'll speak to you there.